Picture an ordinary Chinese Navy frigate, the kind of mid-sized warship that exists by the dozens in nearly every modern Navy, patrolling open water far from the nearest carrier group, with no runway, no catapult, and no flight deck built for fixed-wing aircraft. A small drone lifts straight up off its deck like a helicopter. Seconds later, its rotors fold away almost completely out of sight. A tiny jet engine ignites, and the aircraft rockets forward into high-speed cruise flight, the same way a fighter jet would leave a runway. Except this runway never existed in the first place, and the ship it launched from was never designed to need one. That is not a concept sketch or a computer rendering. It is the description of a real aircraft developed over 10 years at Beihang University in Beijing, one of China's most prestigious aviation research institutions, and one the United States government has specifically sanctioned for its ties to military research. The drone does not even have a public name yet, an unusual detail for a program that has otherwise generated this. Instead is a claim serious enough that multiple defense journalists and naval analysts have taken it seriously. According to the researchers who built it, this may be the first jet-powered aircraft in the world genuinely, capable of both vertical takeoff and high-speed cruise flight in a single unified airframe. Here's the sentence that should genuinely stop you. China currently operates only a handful of true aircraft carriers, but it operates dozens of ordinary destroyers, frigates, and amphibious ships that were never built with a flight deck long enough for a fixed-wing jet. If a drone like this actually works as described, every single one of those ordinary ships instantly gains something only a small handful of the most expensive vessels on Earth currently have: the ability to launch and recover a genuinely fast aircraft, potentially reshaping how an entire navy thinks about where its air power actually comes from. If you find stories like this fascinating, hit the like button. It takes real research to put one of these together, and subscribe so you do not miss the next on E. Here is what you are about to learn: why launching a fast aircraft from an ordinary warship has been such a stubborn engineering problem for decades, exactly how this Chinese drone claims to solve it, and what has actually been tested so far, where the rest of the world stands in this same race, including a very similar American program already underway, and the honest gaps between one university's bold claim and a genuinely deployed naval capability. Let's start with the problem that has made this such a hard nut to crack for so long: why fast aircraft and small ships have never mixed well. Getting a fixed-wing aircraft off the deck of a ship has always required one of two expensive solutions. The first is a long, straight flight deck, the kind only found on a full-sized aircraft carrier, paired with either a steam or electromagnetic catapult system to fling the aircraft up to flying speed in a few hundred feet, since a normal runway's worth of distance simply does not exist at sea. The second is a short takeoff and vertical landing design like the American F-35B, which uses a swiveling engine nozzle to lift straight up, an approach that works but demands an enormously complex and expensive aircraft, built specifically around that one capability, with a price tag and maintenance burden that puts it well out of reach as a solution for anything smaller than a purpose-built assault ship. Aircraft carriers themselves are among the most expensive single pieces of military hardware any country can build, running into the billions of dollars per hull, and taking years to construct, even for nations with mature shipbuilding industries. China currently operates only 3, with a 4th reportedly under construction, a tiny fraction of the roughly 50 other major surface combatants it fields across its destroyer, frigate, and amphibious assault ship classes. That expense means every navy in the world, including China's, operates far more ordinary destroyers, frigates, and amphibious assault ships than it does true carriers. Those smaller vessels typically carry only helicopters, aircraft that can take off vertically but that are fundamentally slower and shorter range than a fixed-wing jet, because a helicopter's rotor has to do the job of both lifting the aircraft and pushing it forward at the same time, a compromise that caps its top speed well below what a dedicated jet engine can achieve, typically somewhere in the range of 250 to 300 kilometers per hour for even the fastest naval helicopters currently in service. This gap between what a carrier can launch and what an ordinary warship can launch has shaped naval strategy for decades. A destroyer on picket duty far from the fleet, or a frigate patrolling a contested stretch of ocean, has always had to make do with helicopter speed reconnaissance and strike options, even when the situation genuinely called for something faster, a limitation that becomes especially significant in a large ocean theater like the Indo-Pacific, where the distances between a ship and whatever it needs to observe or respond to can stretch for hundreds of kilometers. If you're enjoying the depth of this breakdown so far, dropping a like genuinely helps more people find videos like this one. Drone technology briefly seemed like it might sidestep the problem entirely, until engineers ran into the same wall from a different angle. Most fixed-wing military drones, including the American XQ-58A Valkyrie, one of the most advanced attritable combat drones in service anywhere, still need a runway or a rocket-assisted launch rail to get airborne, and a runway of some kind to land, the same infrastructure dependency that has always limited where a fixed-wing platform can actually be based. That requirement quietly locks an entire category of otherwise promising uncrewed aircraft out of operating from the exact ships that make up the bulk of any modern Navy, forcing planners to either accept the helicopter's speed limitations or restrict fast drone operations to the small number of ships large enough to accommodate something closer to true carrier infrastructure. Solving that problem, building something that launches like a helicopter but flies like a jet without carrying the weight and complexity penalty that has traditionally come with that combination, is precisely the challenge the Beihang University team set out to crack, what the Beihang drone actually is. The project traces back to 2015, when associate professors Wang Yaokun and Xiu Yuting began developing the concept at Beihang University, a Beijing-based institution consistently ranked among China's top aerospace research centers, and one the United States has placed under export sanctions specifically because of its role in advanced military-relevant research. The team spent the following 4 years refining the design, reaching what they describe as a stable configuration by 2019, before continuing years of further simulation, control law refinement, and testing focused specifically on how the aircraft handles the notoriously difficult transition between vertical hovering flight and forward cruise flight, the exact same moment of vulnerability that has caused serious problems for other hybrid aircraft designs around the world, including at least one well-documented American tiltrotor program that suffered multiple fatal crashes during that same transition phase over the course of its own multi-decade development. By 2024, the team had moved into high-fidelity simulation and sea-state tolerance testing, essentially modeling how the aircraft would need to perform launching and recovering from a ship's deck in genuinely rough ocean conditions, not just the calm, controlled environment of a test range, before finally going public with the completed research in 2025. The design itself centers on a compact teardrop-shaped fuselage, chosen specifically to minimize drag once the aircraft transitions into forward flight. During takeoff, small, rotors provide vertical lift the same way a helicopter's rotor does, letting the aircraft rise straight up off a ship's deck without any runway or catapult, and without needing the ship to turn into the wind or maintain any particular heading, the way a conventional carrier launch requires. Here's the detail that makes this design genuinely clever rather than just another drone concept. Once the aircraft is airborne and has built up enough forward speed, a patented retractable fairing system folds those rotors away and encloses them almost entirely within the fuselage, a mechanism the developers say cuts aerodynamic drag by up to 60%. With the rotors tucked away, a small onboard turbojet engine takes over, pushing the aircraft into fast, efficient cruise flight the same way a conventional jet would fly, rather than continuing to fight against exposed, spinning rotor blades the entire time, the way earlier hybrid VTOL designs from multiple countries have historically struggled with. The publicly available test results so far come from a scaled-down 45-kilogram prototype, fiber, roughly the same advanced composite material used in modern commercial airliner wings and high-performance sporting equipment, chosen specifically for its combination of low weight and high structural strength. In flight testing, that prototype reached speeds of approximately 228 kilometers per hour, comfortably faster than typical helicopter cruise speeds, while successfully demonstrating smooth transitions between hovering and forward flight, the specific maneuver that has historically been the most dangerous and technically demanding part of any hybrid VTOL aircraft's flight envelope, and the exact phase of flight where several other experimental VTOL programs around the world have run into serious control problems. In a paper published in the Chinese language journal Aeroweaponry in July 2025, the research team stated their design compared favorably in speed against other current mainstream VTOL drone platforms, a claim that, while impossible to independently verify from outside the program, at least reflects genuine confidence from the engineers who built and flight tested the system themselves, rather than an outside marketing team dressing up an early-stage concept. According to materials published on Beihang University's own website, the aircraft was specifically designed to support multi-drone coordination, high-speed reconnaissance, and vertical takeoff and landing operations from destroyer decks, language that makes the intended military application unambiguous rather than left to speculation. Where the rest of the world actually stands, China is not chasing this capability alone, and understanding the global picture is what keeps this story grounded rather than one-sided. If you have made it this far into the technical details, subscribing tells us this is exactly the kind of story worth making more of. The United States has been pursuing a strikingly similar goal through a defense. Advanced Research Project's agency program called Ancillary, short for Advanced Aircraft Infrastructure, Less Launch and Recovery, specifically aimed at developing small, autonomous aircraft capable of operating from naval vessels, including destroyers and other ships that lack a full carrier flight deck without needing extensive launch and recovery equipment. In May 2024, DARPA selected 6 competing companies to move forward into the next phase of that program, treating exactly this capability gap as important enough to fund multiple parallel approaches at once, rather than betting on a single design, a deliberate strategy the agency has used before on other high-risk aerospace programs where no single design approach is obviously superior at the outset. Separately, the American company Shield AI has been developing a considerably larger and more ambitious aircraft called the X-BAT, an AI-piloted, stealth-capable strike jet designed to take off and land vertically from ships, remote islands, or forward operating locations without any runway at all, using a sophisticated vectoring exhaust nozzle system developed in partnership with GE Aerospace. Unlike the compact Beihang drone, X-BAT is sized closer to a genuine fighter, with 2 internal weapons bays that roughly comparable in size to those on an F-35, capable of carrying munitions up to 907 kilograms in total, and enough onboard electrical power to run electronic warfare and jamming systems alongside its primary strike and reconnaissance missions. X-BAT completed a major engine testing milestone in July 2026, clearing a critical technical hurdle on the path toward an actual vertical takeoff demonstration later this year. Unlike the Beihang drone, X-BAT is being designed as a genuine stealth combat aircraft capable of carrying substantial weapons payloads, comparable in scale to fighters like the F-35, representing a considerably more ambitious and more expensive approach to solving the same fundamental problem. What genuinely sets the Beihang drone apart within this global picture is less about the underlying concept, since the United States is clearly racing toward the same capability from more than one direction simultaneously, and more about where each program currently sites on the development timeline, a distinction that matters far more than which country announced its program first. The Beihang team has already flight tested a working prototype and published detailed technical claims in a peer-reviewed defense journal. DARPA's ancillary program remains earlier in its competitive development phase. Still, narrowing down which of its 6 selected contractor designs will advance further. Shield AI's X-BAT, while further along toward an eventual full-scale demonstration, and considerably more capable on paper, has not yet actually achieved a vertical takeoff with its final propulsion configuration. On paper, at least, the Chinese program currently has the most flight test evidence to point to, even if that evidence comes entirely from a scaled-down test article rather than an operational full-sized aircraft, a genuinely meaningful distinction that gets lost in a lot of the more breathless coverage of this story. The honest gaps nobody should skip past. It would be easy to read the coverage of this drone and conclude the Chinese Navy is on the verge of turning every ship in its fleet into a mini aircraft carrier. That conclusion runs well ahead of what has actually been demonstrated. The flight test results published so far describe a 45-kilogram prototype, a genuinely useful proof of concept, but a fraction of the size and weight that any operationally useful reconnaissance or strike drone would eventually need to be, since a platform that small has limited room for sensors, weapons, fuel, or the additional structural reinforcement. A larger, combat, ready airframe would require. Scaling a design like this up while preserving its aerodynamic advantages, particularly that drag-reducing retractable fairing system, is a non-trivial engineering challenge in its own right, and one the publicly available research has not yet addressed in any detail. History offers a useful caution here too. Plenty of promising small-scale VTOL demonstrators from multiple countries over the past 2 decades have hit serious, sometimes fatal, engineering walls once engineers tried to scale them up to genuinely useful combat weight. There is also a transparency gap worth being honest about, and it is worth pausing on before accepting this story at face value, especially given how many defense stories circulate online with far less scrutiny than they deserve. If the level of scrutiny in this video is useful to you, subscribing helps this channel keep digging past the initial headlines on stories like this one. As of the most recent reporting, no images or video of the aircraft itself have been publicly released, only written descriptions drawn from the research team's own academic paper and Beihang University's public materials. The drone does not yet have an official name. No confirmed timeline for military deployment has been announced, and there is no independent third-party verification of the performance claims beyond the research team's own published results. That absence of visual confirmation stands out, since most comparable Chinese defense technology reveals in recent years, from new fighter jets to naval vessels, have come with at least some released imagery, even heavily controlled or selectively released imagery, making this particular program notably quieter on that front. None of that means the claims are false. University aerospace programs in China have a real track record of transitioning research prototypes into operational systems. But it does mean the appropriate level of confidence here is cautious interest rather than certainty that this exact aircraft will be flying off Chinese warships within the next year or two. Why this still matters, uncertainty and all. Strip away the uncertainty around deployment timelines, and what remains IIS still a genuinely significant piece of engineering, and a clear signal about where naval aviation is heading globally. China currently operates a rapidly growing fleet of large deck amphibious ships, including 4 commissioned Type 075 landing helicopter docks, and at least 1 Type 076 already. Launched alongside dozens of destroyers and frigates that presently rely on comparatively slow helicopters for their organic air power. A working, deployable version of this drone would not require building a single new hull. It would simply unlock a meaningfully faster reconnaissance and strike capability on ships China has already built and already operates, a far cheaper path to expanded naval air power than constructing additional aircraft carriers, each of which takes years to build and represents an enormous, difficult-to-replace investment if it were ever lost or damaged in a conflict. A defense analyst, quoted in early coverage of the program, described the strategic logic plainly, noting that a capability like this effectively turns every major surface combatant into a forward operating base. Since an adversary can no longer assume that only a handful of easily tracked carriers pose a fast aircraft threat, and can no longer plan around simply monitoring the small number of ships that have traditionally carried that kind of capability. That shift from a small number of obvious, heavily defended launch points to potentially dozens of ordinary ships each carrying the same capability is exactly the kind of change that makes military planners, on the other side of a potential conflict, recalculate their assumptions, regardless of how quickly the underlying aircraft actually reaches full operational service. The broader pattern here should sound familiar if you have followed other recent Chinese technology stories. Beihang University sits on a United States sanctions list specifically intended to slow down exactly this kind of advanced military-relevant research. And yet the program moved forward. Regardless, funded and developed entirely within China's own university and defense research system over a full decade, without needing access to any foreign component, partnership, or technology transfer that the sanctions were designed to block. That is the same story that has played out across multiple other Chinese technology sectors, facing similar restrictions in recent years. A sanctioned institution continuing to produce genuinely advanced work using domestic resources and talent, regardless of what access to foreign technology or partnerships has been cut off. A pattern worth watching closely, regardless of which specific technology category it shows up in next. What happens next depends on whether Beihang's team, or a state-linked defense contractor picking up the underlying research, can successfully scale this concept from a 45-kilogram test article into something genuinely useful for real naval missions, a jump that has derailed plenty of promising prototype aircraft before they ever reached operational service anywhere in the world, including several ambitious eVTOL programs in the United States and Europe that never made it past the demonstrator stage. But the fundamental question this drone was built to answer, whether a single aircraft could genuinely combine helicopter-style vertical takeoff with real jet-speed cruise flight without the runway that question has always assumed you needed, appears to have a real flight-tested answer now, and that alone is worth paying attention to, regardless of how long full deployment actually takes. If this changed how you think about the future of naval aviation, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next deep dive. There are more videos on the screen if you want to keep exploring, and if you have questions about how this compares to any of the other programs mentioned in this video, the comments are the best place to ask. Here's a question worth sitting with. Do you think this kind of runway-free jet drone becomes standard equipment on ordinary warships within the next decade, or does scaling it up to something genuinely combat useful prove harder than the early test results suggest? Let me know in the comments.